I'm Father Terence Curley, and once again, I'm very happy to be with you and to continue with our exploring different ways to understand how we grieve and what grieving really means for us and how we cope and find ways to find healing and what is really happening now in the experience of grief ministry and certainly in this new psychology of grief. Very often we are affected by the new psychology, and I can recall the old psychology, which were the standard theories or the dominant theory as they're called, which unfortunately still are very much around, where a person is told that they have to perform certain tasks or do certain things in order to let go, in order to move on with their life. Well, I certainly want everyone to move on, but I don't want you to necessarily let go. I think it's really cruel to say that we have to remember everything in order to forget it. Especially with our loved ones, we want to remember them. And interestingly enough, the word remember in Hebrew actually means to make present. And that's what we truly believe in the Eucharist. Jesus told us he'd be with us forever and that he's making himself present. And so too the memories, the dreams, all of that, along with the person, are still being made present to us. And that's one of the findings that we actually experience with the new interviewing, the new approaches that are given for the new science or the new psychology of loss. The new psychology doesn't follow the old theories at all. It doesn't say that the end of grief is just to forget someone. One of the researchers, Robert Niemeyer, talks about what we call grief work. And grief work means that we go through a process, and in that process, we remember everything. And it's actually, in the psychoanalytical terms, you don't have to know all this, but that's what's employed. It's called hypercathecting. We remember everything. And then the purpose of that is to free everything up so that we can move on. So we forget that what we remembered. You know, it's really the exact opposite of everything we understand about the human mind and the human brain. It's developed a lot since Sigmund Freud. And the understanding is that with our neural passages and the way God made us, the more we try to forget something, the more we remember it. So it's the way it works. It's counterproductive. And it really is not helping us with our grief. It's hurting us. And so that type of counseling really doesn't work. And so we have to be very aware. It's almost like the buyer beware, you know, of what am I receiving for counseling? Am I receiving something that's going to talk about a medical model where I'm recovering from a loss? Well, what happened was there were major changes in our understanding about grief. Certainly, as I said before, and I continually tell you about Freud. And then there was Eric Lindemann came along, and he did a series of interviews. And unfortunately, the interviews were done in a mental institution. So there were pre-existing conditions and everything else that really clouded it. And with Eric Lindemann, he wrote a paper called about the symptomatology of grief back in 1944. Once you use those words, the symptomatology of grief, you're talking about symptoms, you're talking about an illness. But it really isn't. It's not an illness. Yes, can a person become ill? Well, if they're already ill, a pre-existing condition, well, that covers it. But we're not treating grief anymore, we're treating the pre-existing condition. So it's not a psychological illness. And that's what I think we have to focus on. Grief, well, trauma could be an illness, but that's not what we're treating here. You can have traumatic approaches, you treat the trauma. Grief is normal. As we struggle to come into the world, we struggle to leave the world. It's part of the lifespan. And that's why this whole theory of I remember in order to sever a bond and move on really doesn't work. Niemeyer has a wonderful interview he's talking about in his books too, on lessons of loss. Niemeyer talks about the idea of remembering and letting go like that as, you know, trying to remember all these memories in order to forget them. It's like looking at the sun too long without protection. You're going to hurt your eyes. And that's exactly what happens. We're looking at the sun too long, and we can hurt ourselves. So what we don't know about grief can't hurt us. So we need to know what the new approaches are and what the new approaches really offer and how they can help us to focus and and find meaning and realize that, grief is universal, but one size doesn't fit all. And that's what we have to realize, that after Eric Lindemann, along came Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Again, it was a purely psychological model. And really, we don't hold to Kubler-Ross's approach. I think she did a lot for palliative care and brought the consciousness up. But the idea of just a psychological adjustment and to say that you go through these steps, these stages, and they move along, even if they're not sequential. But that isn't the way people die. We don't die that way. We don't grieve that way. We don't go through other losses that way, with separations, divorces, all those things that people go through. But they applied her theory to that. And of course, it doesn't work. And that's what we realized. That was Lindemann was about 1940, and then again around 1969, 1970 is when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross sent out her theory on these stages. But we realized that life isn't like that. We can't say that everyone passes through this stage to this stage to this sequentially, because it doesn't work that way. And we know that now. We know about the interviewing techniques with her, and they're not the modern techniques that we use in actually interviewing and finding out the meaning that people are searching for. A religious model ties in. There hasn't been enough research on it, but there is a lot of research now on meaning, and that is religious. How do I find meaning? How do I make meaning? How do I receive meaning? And I think that opens up the door. We're opening up the door to a wonderful dialogue with our Catholic faith. We're on, as I said so many times to so many people, we're on the threshold of the kingdom. And we have to realize that. And sometimes we can peer over a little bit and get little glimpses of the kingdom. And that's where the context of faith, the hope that we have, makes all the difference, because it is a struggle to grieve. We're all struggling, and it's part of our life. Who or what we struggle with is really defining for us as a person. But many times we have to deconstruct things that were told to us, almost like being de-schooled of these terms that people tell you. Meaningfully, they're only mimicking what's been said in the theoretical plane, much higher in the theories, but it's all theory-driven. We have to fit into the theory rather than the theory actually following what is real and what we really experience. And so it's theory-driven. If I don't really say I'm moving on, if I say, yes, I can forget, or yes, I can find deeper meaning, now I'm reinvesting in a new relationship, I can do all those things, then if I don't do that, I'm going against the theory, and it's theory-driven. And we don't want to do that. We want the new psychology, which says, yes, I'm relational. Yes, I have meaning. Yes, I want to continue my bond because I feel the presence of a loved one. And it's much more than psychology. We don't reduce everything to psychology. As a mental health counselor, I know that. And the struggle is to say, where do we find meaning? I remember when I was a young priest, and I knew about the theory to a degree, and I remember talking to people and saying, well, I'm supposed to help them to let go. I even thought about some of the crisis aspects of it. If someone really cried and broke down, then that was successful because they were starting to face it, and they were starting to move on, they were starting to let go. But I always wondered about it. I always wondered about it. Even in my first book that I wrote, with Sheed and Ward, Console One Another, I wondered even then about what really is happening here. Fortunately, at the same time, I wrote a book called The Ministry of Consolation with the Society of St. Paul, which talked about the meaning of the ritual. And that helped me a lot, because I said, we still have a ritual, and rituals connect us. So I'd say to people, well, we let go in order to reconnect. I think we relinquish certain things. The physical presence, you know, the poet says, over the sound of a voice that is gone, or the touch of a hand that's gone, the sound of a voice that's quiet. All of those things, yes, those are physical things that aren't with us, but the reality of the presence of the person is still very much with us. And that's what we truly believe in the communion of saints. So the new approach is far more compatible with us. And we've been doing this for centuries, talking about the kingdom, talking about our relationship, talking about the hopes that we have. and the meaning that we have because of our belief system, which really fires and engenders everything else. So as a young priest, I struggled with it, and I said to myself, you know, what's really going on here? And as the years went by, and I kept on reading, and I went to Boston University, I kept on reading, and being fine-tuned to the needs that people face. And along comes the new theories, teaching us about how we process loss, teaching us about what loss is really like. It can be shattering, but also can be spiritual and can be meaningful. I changed. I had to change. And I had to change in the way I counsel people, the way I met with people, my liturgies, the homilies, the support groups. Everything changed because I realized we have an ongoing relationship in faith. I've always believed in the communion of saints, but now it makes it so much more real because there's a dialogue going on. As I said in so many times to my students, when I talk to someone, they're almost reticent about being able to say, oh, I talked to a loved one. Well, I think it shows about the mystery of eternal life. If we're certainly dialoguing with those who've gone before us, we certainly believe even deeper in forever after, in eternal life, and in the hopes that we have as Christians.